So I had a look at your meditative inquiry thing. So I, I've got almost two streams of questions, because you said I should have a couple of streams of questions, and some of them, um, in terms of like my own background that I come from, like some of them may like are for clarification a little bit, and maybe are perceived as a little bit antagonistic, but I don't want you to see them as antagonistic. It's me just trying to really understand how this looks. And I saw some of the, I saw little snippets of things in your article there with Downey, with Adrian Downey. Like I saw components in there that were almost sort of the beginnings of things that I wanted to know a lot more about. So that's sort of one side of questions. And then, as you know, I'm also really interested in seeing how this approach could actually work in engagement with nature. So there's almost two streams of questions. So maybe like even in reading your stuff, it doesn't seem as though we can separate those two streams of questions, because I think they probably are linked, but I've arbitrarily separated them, so we can leave it at that, and then maybe as we move along we can go through it. Does that feel good for you?
Yeah, that sounds great. And again, thank you, Shane, for taking the time out and reading the pieces and thinking about the questions. I really appreciate that kind of intention and that kind of interest in exploration. Before you ask me questions, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, what motivated you to have this conversation with me in terms of your own work, in terms of your interest in my work, and yeah, primarily what motivated you to have this conversation? Because I think that will become part of the paper that we will write based on this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting that you talk about that, because, like, as you know, like I've done a lot of sailing, and I really like there's definitely a connection that I want to explore between human beings and the environment that they engage in. And one of the things like that really like was a catalyst to my thinking on this is when I went on a sailing trip with my daughter. And I think I showed you the video of like this 14-foot swordfish that was following the boat. And my daughter, her body was shaking. She was so excited from seeing this fish. And I thought to myself, there's something happening here that, that's special. And I wanted to try and understand how we can look at a situation like that and use it as a way to help engage students in learning, and specifically, maybe not specifically, but engage in learning with nature. And I started thinking about awe and wonder, and I actually I'm in the process of writing an article about awe and wonder, and challenging, like, and I see it in some of your work here, challenging this idea, because at the moment there's a big idea around ocean literacy, and ocean literacy lacks humility in my conception of things. Because then I started, as I was digging into doing some research for this paper, I came across this concept of reverence. And because some of the authors were talking about awe and wonder as sort of being passive, and reverence as being a more active engagement with the space. And I actually wrote down a line that I quite like, because one of the things, there's a indigenous author who talks about research as ceremony, and he talks about the space between us and the environment as being sacred. And awe and wonder in my mind didn't encapsulate the sacredness of the space between human beings and the environment. And so, but reverence does. So so when you, and Wilson talks about ceremony. And so I see the idea of ceremony being the enactment of reverence. So, when we engage in ceremony, we enacting the reverence we have for the space or the moment, or, whatever it is that we're engaging with. Um, so I see this, like when I read through the articles that you have, like I see some links between the space that I'm sort of engaging in a very sort of neophyte. I'm a beginner in this space, so like I'm sort of prodding around trying to sort some of this stuff out. And when I look at meditative inquiry, like I do see a real strong link between sort of that meditative inquiry piece and maybe this reverence that I'm playing around with. So that and then again, that speaks to my engagement with the nature space. And then, for sort of some of the critical discussion around education, like having been born in apartheid era South Africa, like, I'm it's very hard for me to let go of the political implications of education. Like, so I always see education as a political act. And and because the society of the apartheid South Africa was actually constructed through the control of information and through the formal education structures that existed there, I think for a large part that influenced people's perceptions of the world. And and I come out of South Africa, and even in Canada, like if you have a critical eye, you can actually see nuanced control being implemented or constructed, like, and you reference it in your paper, this the normalcy, or like the standardized tests, like there's certainly an underlying economic objective to education. And that's constructing our reality. Like the perceptions that people have when they engage in school are constructed perceptions. And you talk about
Mhm.
that, like where people are invested in that system because they're deriving benefit from that system, right? And so when we have standardized tests that prioritize literacy, well, who does that prioritize socially and economically, right? So all of a sudden, we start seeing perhaps that political underpinning. So, you know, those are that's the background that I bring to the conversation.
That is wonderful. And why did you think, Shane, that I would be the right person to explore your idea, your interest in awe and wonder and reverence and education as a political act?
Well, the moment that like like dialogic meditative inquiry, like you know the moment I heard that, I actually heard it from a colleague of mine, and I was like, dialogic meditative, like, it's almost like when I was sitting here, and I actually wrote this in my article. It's like, there's an intuitive sense, like when I was sitting there talking about wonder and awe, there was an intuitive sense that I couldn't necessarily pinpoint why I didn't feel comfortable with that term, and why when I thought, oh, reverence, like that resonated with me, maybe on a non-intellectual level, let's say, like, I responded to that. And so the moment that I heard sort of dialogic meditative inquiry, there was an intuitive response that I had just to hearing those words put together. And like, because I often talk about, like, I like dialogic processes. Like, I think that one of the things that I, going back to South Africa, is that there was a lack of dialogue because there was only one truth that was constructed by the hegemonic systems in South Africa, and there was no conversation regarding that truth, which would be the dialogue. So like when you look at, when you look at some of the authors like Freire, etc., like, we talk about these dialogic negotiated truths. And so there's a part of that speaks to me. I also like the meditative inquiry piece, like this idea of, reflecting on the process. And then, I didn't have much understanding beyond what those words meant to me until we were having our conversations when we were walking, during the work
Picket
action.
line.
Right? Yeah, the picket line, right?
Picket
So,
line. Yeah.
so once we started having those conversations on the picket line, then I could be like, oh, okay, like, this, it started to coalesce, even though, you know, like I was at that point when we were talking, I was engaged in the awe and wonder thought, and I hadn't quite got to reverence yet, so it was, so yeah, I think those conversations that we had when, I was actually trying to understand in more detail the things that you were doing, that that made me think, okay, like, let's have a look at this in more detail.
No, I think that's wonderful. And it is important for me to know where you are coming from, and what the purpose of the conversation is, and what has been your thoughts and intentions behind coming to this space of mutual exploration. And it was wonderful talking to you. Even before we started talking at the picket line, we had a conversation at one of the
Yeah.
the holiday events at the
Yes.
mount, right? And
Yeah.
then we said, okay, we will connect at some
Yeah.
point, we will connect. And then of course people become busy, right? We become
Yeah.
busy. And then it was good to reconnect at the picket line.
Yeah.
And I'm very intrigued by the questions, or the thoughts that you have, and I'm like very willing to engage, because nature is very central to meditative inquiry. As you might recall, I sent you a description of my a part from my course outline, where I've asked students to do a nature reflection journal, which is
Hmm.
basically being in the nature, observing nature, listening to nature, and see what happens to them and what they learn about nature and themselves through that engagement. So I think that's very important aspect of my whole pedagogy. And uh, critique is also very central to meditative inquiry. I will send you a chapter that was an introduction to the edited book that I put together a while ago. I don't know whether I shared with you or not, but I will share it with you. And one of the key principles of meditative inquiry is questioning everything, and
Hmm.
questioning everything without fear, and the possibility of creating dialogue between and among people, rather than as Paulo Freire says, one-sided pedagogy, where you are just imposing your notions of truth, your notions of what is right, what is not right, what can you do, what can you not do on other people. So your preface makes it very interesting for me to go into this exploration further. So I would be happy to engage with your questions now, and I might ask you questions as we go along.
Yeah, no, and some of the questions, like, like, I got a bit of classroom experience, like, because my initial background as well was like working in classroom settings. So like when I read some of the stuff, I'm like, okay, like, but there's an implementation piece that comes from it. Anyway, um, so
And
what?
just one more thing,
Yep.
Shane. So as we are having this conversation, of course, we are welcome to have spontaneous questions. I
Yeah.
think to have something in the beginning so that there is an intentional component to it, right? But other than that, the nature of dialogical meditative inquiry is that it is spontaneous and emergent. You
Yeah.
can come with intention and intentionality, but then it opens the space for
Sure.
exploration. So listening to something new that can emerge is so central.
Yes, absolutely. And I actually kind of liked in your article with Adrian Downey there the emergent piece, because I know when we're working in the child and youth space, which is my department, there's a big emphasis on emergent curriculum. And it's funny, I was talking to my wife because they're doing a lot of curriculum mapping in our department, and I was like, that's kind of tricky for me because a lot of the time in my classes I'm engaging in this emergent curricular process, and so you don't necessarily want to have those restrictions. Um, but so let's start out with sort of the politically oriented questions, and we'll see how the conversation goes from there. And then hopefully we can get to those nature ones in a bit. Um,
Sure.
just going like and again like this is a lot of these questions are coming from the fact that I don't really know anything about meditative inquiry or this holistic learning approach. But one of the things that you mentioned was authentic and meaningful, right? And so like when I read those words, I struggle with sort of how we might define what authentic and meaningful are. And I recognize that those are pretty subjective terms, but when you engaging in a group of people or students, and you're talking about authenticity and meaningfulness, like I'm curious as to how you present that to the class, or even for me as a student in this space, how am I to understand those concepts as they apply to meditative inquiry?
Wonderful question. Do you have that paragraph in front of you, Shane, from where this question emerged?
Yep.
So
So
if you can
I've got
read out
here.
that paragraph, yeah.
Ask authentic and meaningful questions. For me,
You, your
true and transformative education is not occurring.
so just a moment. I think your voice was cutting out.
Oh, sorry.
Just give me a minute, right? I need to send a quick note. Just give me a minute. I'm just sending this note to my wife in case she's using microwave, because sometimes when you use microwave, the talk cuts out, right? So yeah,
Okay.
do you mind reading that
Yeah,
out
yeah,
again?
I'll read it again. Sure. And so this is on page 2 of your article there. You're talking about unless there is a real passion to understand and explore, and unless students and I ask authentic and meaningful questions, for me, true and transformative education is not occurring. And I can
Mhm.
carry on. So, within that space, like you're talking with the students about authentic and meaningful questions. And, I wonder, what are the parameters for that when you're in that space?
See, I think I tell you where that is coming from, because the kind of educational spaces that we have constructed in the schools and the universities are mediated by a given curriculum, a curriculum that is a contested space, that is negotiated through the dynamic between different people when there is a power dynamic going on. So what gets to reflect in curriculum is dominated by people in power, those who have the control. And that's why curriculum is a reflection of power, and whose truth or whose ideologies are more relevant, whose knowledge or whose conception of knowledge is more important to learn. That's what gets reflected in the curriculum. Just because of that, we create inauthentic spaces in the schools and the universities, because the curriculum is dominated, curriculum is controlled. curriculum is pre-decided. And like all other factors in the society, the power, the the your place in the society, your place in the social structure, all that influence what gets reflected in the curriculum and what is studied in the classrooms and in the schools and the universities. So that very fact takes the authenticity away. And in schools, even to a greater extent, because there is very little academic freedom, even what the teacher needs to teach is already decided and is
mm,
often linked to the standardized testing that is happening at at the end of the completion of the course, right? Or throughout. So this pre decided nature of what knowledge is of most worth, including how that knowledge should be transmitted or engaged with, even deciding those processes, to me, takes away the authenticity and meaningfulness from learning and from educational experience out, because it's not my inner pursuit of learning, exploration, understanding that I am approaching the educational space. It's the pressure of the society, the pressure of the government, the pressure of the educational system, the demand of the economic systems, all that is pushing me into the educational space. So by the time I'm coming to the educational space, I'm not sure whether I'm authentically interested in that subject matter,
mm,
whether that subject matter means something to me. And because of that, to me, the possibility of a learning that transforms you, that deeply changes your mind, that deeply, invigorates you, it doesn't exist. So that's why I think authenticity and meaningfulness is very important. So that's one response to that. There is another response as well. Uh, Often students are doing the work in order to achieve a grade or to respond to the demands of the person in authority, which is the professor or the teacher. So, because the orientation is not necessary to explore oneself and what one wants to do, but driven by the authority of the teacher or the authority of the system that has put that teacher in that place, also undermines authenticity and meaningfulness. So, what I do in my courses to avoid that is students are allowed and not allowed, encouraged to choose the work that they want to do, the readings that they want to do. Of course, it's not possible for me to do in 100% way because I need to design a curriculum, right, and present it to them. If I had unlimited time with them, of course I will co-construct everything with them.
mm,
But even in the design that that develop before the course starts, there are places for them to choose their own reading material, to write very open reflective journals, to choose the topics that really draw their attention rather than something that I am interested in. So from the
mm,
very beginning, from the very step of the curriculum design, their personal engagement, their their curiosities, their what they would like to explore is made central in the course and is made clear to them from the very beginning. And if you'll see my course evaluations and the engagement that I have with the students, that's what they really emphasize, that there is an open dialogical atmosphere in which we explore the thoughts and ideas, where it is emphasized that everybody shares what they really find meaningful in what we are studying, right? And to make it authentic, it's also made very clear that don't do this work for me, do
mm,
this work for yourself. Because most of my students are teachers, right? Do this work for yourself, because once you have the taste of this freedom and this creative exploration, you're going to encourage that in your classroom spaces, which may be restricted. Despite that, once you have tasted this, you will also encourage the authenticity among your students and encourage them to find meaning in what they are doing rather than just following what's happening.
So the conversation that you had leads to another, like it leads to another point that I have here, and it comes like it's another section of your paper, but you spoke about like and you hinted on it at the end there, the freedom, like once you experience that freedom from some of those structures that are imposing the curriculum and a way of being really in your life and your educational experiences, which you could that you see the link to South Africa in that discussion, so it's kind of interesting, but here we're talking about it often from an economic perspective. But you say that freedom is not a technique, it's a way of being, right? And so like, because you have this conversation about technique, and you talk about Bachelor of Education students taking these ideas and using it as a technique in another space, and you're like, no, that's not, it's not a technique, it's a way of being in the world. And you have to embody this, and it has to become part of who you are, so that it is authentic, right? Because I think if it isn't part of who you are, then it lacks this authenticity. Um, so I really quite like that idea. But one of the things that I perhaps struggle with is that if a student, like, and this is going to sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like when I think of meditative inquiry, this is in that space where it's almost its actualization of self. Like, it's pretty near the top of that pyramid. You may have students that are still working maybe on survival needs, and they don't necessarily have the luxury of, or maybe a luxury or privilege or whatever you want to call it, of being able to um, release themselves in the space of this meditative inquiry, because if they've got time to be able to reflect, maybe that's time that they would rather put into meeting their survival needs. Now, I maybe the answer would be, I don't want to say, but like, spiritual, like this meditative is part of survival needs, but like I think in the, that's objectively speaking, but subjectively, this individual who is stuck trying to meet survival needs, how do they engage in this reflective process that's meant to bring them freedom, etc.? I know that's a little bit all over the show, but
No, no, I think that's very important. I want to address two points from from your narration right now. One is the idea of way of being, and how that way of being uh, is often uh, conditioned by the social forces. And they are not just economic forces, they are political forces, they are cultural forces, they are market forces, they are forces from the media, they are forces from the music and the art and the literature. Whatever discourse is floating around us shapes our way of being. Including, it shapes us biologically, how we moves our eyes, how we speak, how we listen. So much of it is constructed by the discourses that are going on around us. So the very fact that human beings lives in the space of the knowledge, the constructed knowledge space, and I'm using knowledge as all kinds of thought patterns that are around us, whether it is from the economic system or the cultural practices or the religious practices or the political ideologies and whatnot. This whole web is around us from the very moment we take birth, and it begins to shape the way we are, the way we act in the world. And that is true everywhere. So one of the significant aspect of meditative inquiry is to realize this network of thought, this web of discourse around us, so that we begin to see how it has shaped us, has constructed us in any context we are. That seeing, that observing, that questioning begins to create space in our mind, in our brain, where there is a possibility of freedom. But if we
mm,
don't even realize this, recognize this, and begin to see how it impacts us and our relationship on a day-to-day basis, I think there is very little space for freedom, for real freedom. Um, that's one aspect. The other aspect is about the survival needs. There are so many responses I can give from that, but first I would like to begin by acknowledging, if life is very difficult for you, if the life has become extremely difficult, see what is happening in Gaza Strip, for example, right?
mm,
That's an extreme case, or happening in many parts of the world where people don't have food to eat or shelter.
mm.
And there is a wave of migration that is happening. People are trying to find places where they can be safe, where they can live their life. Before these hard lines of nations, there was a possibility for people to migrate and move as they pleased, as their circumstances allowed, and find different places. But now we have made it so bureaucratized, so racist, so nationalistic, that it's very difficult for people to find places to be where they can feel safe and secure, right? And do something that they want to do. Like people rave about Canada giving spaces to people to come here, right? But it's all, most of it is economically driven.
Yeah, yeah,
Canada needs people, so
yeah.
it creates hierarchy of who they want, who they don't want. Like for example, I live here, I have sufficient means to have my family here, but even if I want, I can't have it. I have to go through their bureaucratic structure in order to have anybody here. So it's like very much decided who the people in power want, who the people in power not want. Sometimes it's this trait that is important, sometimes it's that trait that is important. Just this is just a
Yeah.
an example I'm giving you, how much we have made life into difficult, and how difficult it's people in many parts of the world to just have a living, a proper living. And there are so many reasons for that: economic, political, but also deeply psychological and spiritual reasons. The way we have created these structures which are highly unequal, and only some people are able to live in properly sufficient ways, and a majority of us are struggling very hard. So when that is the kind of a situation, for a majority of the population of the world, that situation in itself is causing creating a situation where meditativeness is not possible. Because if your mind is struggling for its safety, for the survival of itself and its family, or its community, that that state is not conducive to meditation,
Mm,
because you are in a state of a constant struggle. You don't have the possibility of being stable. So that's one thing. And then, uh, as I said, the forces of conditioning coming at you from all sides and shaping your minds and structures, that's another thing. But there is one more thing, very important thing that should be recognized as well, which people often, who are interested in the notions of equality and equity and all that, which I'm very much interested in too, miss. A lot of us may not be interested in meditative exploration, right? Because of the social structures that we live in, that we grow in, emphasize desire,
mm,
emphasize competition, desire in the sense of keep getting more and more and more, the capitalist structure, right? The comparison that is enforced on us, be like somebody else or be better than somebody else, keep struggling. So the very social structure we have not created social and educational spaces where looking at oneself, understanding oneself in a deeper way, understanding one's fears, one's anxieties, one's conflicts within oneself and in relation to other people. It's not emphasized in the educational spaces, right? So if somebody comes to my classroom, and I give you specific examples, all kinds of people are coming to my classroom. International students are coming, those who are struggling, maybe struggling. Many of them struggle uh, because of the lack of employment and higher rents and all that, right?
mm,
Teachers are coming who feels oppressed in the system, in the public education system they are teaching. But when they come with whatever inner and outer pressures they are bringing themselves with, I try to create an educational space where there is at least a moment of relief, where they can explore that,
mm.
how they are being bombarded, what struggles they are currently experiencing. So I tell you, are you aware of Qigong?
Yeah, vaguely, yes. Like I wouldn't profess to have any real knowledge of it. Yeah, but so yeah, if you want to give me like some foundational underpinning, that'd be great.
So Qigong is an ancient Chinese exercise system, but it's not exercise system only. It's a way of moving your body, uh, that you are not only physically moving, but meditatively you are experiencing a different connection with your body, with your mind, and the surrounding, the nature around you. So when students come to my class, I have been learning Qigong for a while now and very interested in that. When students, so this happened in my class. I taught holistic education in winter, and I do it, and I don't know what people are liking, what people are not liking. Consistently every time, this relieve us of our physical and psychological pain. When I came, my neck was hurting, I was very stressed, my head was hurting, I had a pain in my head, right, or I had a pain in my back. But every time they feel energized by it, because so they have their pressures, the oppressive factors, the difficulties of life, right? But the light comes back to their
Mm,
faces. I'm really not praising because I doubt, what is it working on them, is it working on them? I want to do it because it works on me, I really love it. But I want to see whether what how they respond, right? And I ask them, every time we do something, you got to tell me really what you think of it, because I have to do it with other students. If you think that there is a problem, that something is causing you difficulty, stress, then I need to know so that I change what I'm doing. But you'll be surprised, literally their faces light up,
mm.
and that is a surprise for me too. I just taught a course called Music of India through cultural department of cultural studies. And the first hour of each class was sitting on the floor. Those who could, most of them could. One person had an injury, so he was sitting on the chair. You sit on the floor, we do some vocal warm ups, some physical warm ups, and then learn songs. We did master 3 songs that we performed at the Mount. I don't know whether you get the notice or not. I should have sent it to you. You would have enjoyed that, I think. So, they did that, and I don't know why, like what would be their response, what are they thinking about what we are doing. But unanimously for them it was a very meditative experience. For many of them, the language has, they have no clue of that language. We were learning songs in Hindi, right?
Yeah.
They had no clue of the music. Some of them did, some of them were from India, but others had no clue of the musical system, of how the melodies work, right? But consistently their experience was that this is a meditative experience for them. They don't care whether they are really learning the songs or not, which they did, but the experience was meditative. So what I'm trying to get at is that if we can create educational spaces, social spaces, where being together, working on your well being, understanding yourself, reflecting on yourself, sitting together in a community, right? These students were sitting side by side in a classroom in front of me on the floor, and they loved that experience. But we create so many barriers, especially in the Western societies. It seems there are like barriers between people. There are like invisible walls between people, which you don't see in places like India. I don't know about South Africa, but in India, you won't see that. And these students, for the first time, experienced that. the boundaries fell, a small group sitting together and exploring something, right? So
mm,
I think basically what I'm trying to say, Shane, oppressions exist, struggles exist, life is very difficult, the climate crisis is going on, a majority of the population is not living the way human beings should live, can live. Like I was reading somewhere, there is a group on peace. I'm not remembering its exact nomenclature right now, and they were saying that the amount of money government spend on defense
yeah,
is more than the amount of money needed to end world hunger.
yeah,
That's insanity. So human beings
yeah,
are completely insane.
yeah,
So I recognize the structural problems, the psychological problems, the problem of colonization, all that I recognize. But I still feel there is a possibility, despite all the difficulties and problems, to create those spaces where people can catch a breath, can nourish themselves, can energize themselves. That probably will give them more strength and energy to be in the difficult spaces they are. But we try to have a different argumentation. Unless everything becomes better, meditation is not possible, or looking
mm,
inward is not possible. So I don't agree with Maslow's hierarchy. At one level I do agree with it, at another level I don't agree with it. There are a lot of
mm,
people in India who talked about the importance of spiritual life and spiritual wisdom, no matter what your economic status is.
mm,
A lot of poor, there are have been lot of underprivileged poor saints from India
yeah,
who didn't have any. Like Kabir is one example I always give. You might want to look into it. It came up quite a bit in my class, and students just were drawn to his philosophy and his, the way of looking at the world, and they all wanted to explore further, and hopefully they will.
yeah,
So I think there is a truth to it. When you have economic stability, when you have physical stability, you may be drawn to meditation more. But at the same time, there are a lot of rich people uh, who give a crap about
yeah,
looking inwardness or living a holistic life. They
mm,
are on the path of becoming richer
yeah.
and exploiting and oppressing people. So while there is a relationship, I don't think it's a deterministic relationship.
Mm. Yeah, and as you're talking, it leads me to the like I like just reflecting on South Africa when you talk about people having spaces where they can create hope. I don't think I don't think apartheid or the political resistance to apartheid could have occurred without spaces that you're describing, because I, as a teenager growing up in South Africa, I wouldn't have had access to those spaces. But as you're talking, I'm thinking to myself that those spaces must have existed amongst the black African population that's actively working against the apartheid system. You need those spaces of hope in order to mobilize the people against the system. So like I do see that correlation. But as you're talking again, and in making that correlation, and another line that you put was like fear underpins the system. And like so people are afraid of not being successful, or they're afraid of being poor, and that's what pushes them into this education system that's inauthentic, as we've discussed. And even though they may not be they may not be realizing their potential as a human being. But yeah, because it's funny because in my classes, this is just a little side note. We've had conversations like I'll actually put out the question like, do you want to actualize as a human being, or do you want to like actualize as a human resource? Because sometimes that's what's happening in the your education system. You're being made into a human resource, right? And
Absolutely.
uh, so, but the thing that you say, and I forget what page it's on, but you say that political propaganda, like page 9, they it's a gentle but intense approach. It is your conviction and your engagement that's going to touch people. It's not a political propaganda of which you need to convince people. And I think that when you talk about it not being a political propaganda, but I think that it is political. Like, again, going back to the baggage that I bring to this, because if everybody in Canada, or like, let's just say Canada for now, if everybody in Canada began to engage in this way of being, like this philosophical way of being, and embodied it, then that certainly presents challenges to the economic system, the social systems, that present themselves. So, I really do see, like, the work that you're doing as being political in its nature. Now, do you?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. See, I think the one thing that I didn't respond before, you were talking about uh, dialogue or meditative inquiry is not just a technique.
yeah,
So it is not something that is superficial, that you add to yourself, like a growth mindset approach or this approach or that approach. We have so many approaches in education, right? That you attach to yourself and then you implement it, but there is no real transformation within yourself,
mm, yeah,
right? So the way I look at meditative inquiry is not something that I have developed a system and now you take it out and um, become my agents
yeah,
and implement that system everywhere. The goal of this approach is for me to invite you in an engagement with me, and through that engagement you create your own approaches, you create your own way of being, and that way of being, wherever you will go, will have a an interaction, a dialogue with people. So it's much more organic and subtle than, okay, here is the 5 step approach, go and implement it,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
right? So that's the one part that I wanted to connect. And but similar to, and it's connected to the point that you're talking about, because it's a way of being, which means through engagement, your authentic, meaningful, and exploratory engagement, you begin to change, your
mm,
thinking begin to change, right? And that is a way of transformation that is different from a transformation where you uh, convince people, where you create a propaganda, right? And say
yeah,
this is the best thing, everybody has to, this is the new bandwagon, everybody has to get on it and everybody has to follow that.
yeah,
So it's different from that. It's a very uh, authentic personal and relational engagement and exploration. And of course, when that happens and the changes are happening in you, which are very organic and subtle, it's not a superficial approach, right? Like cognitive behavioral therapy, just change the thought,
hmm,
a negative thought, rather than changing the whole being. But
yeah,
when your being begins to change from the very the core of your existence, right, then that poses a huge challenge to
yeah,
wherever you are, because you will be asking difficult questions. You will be questioning inequitable practices. You will be questioning racism. You will be questioning injustice. So, of course, it poses a great threat, and it has a definite political potential.
yeah,
My dear supervisor and colleague Bill Piner, with whom I had a dialogue, a similar dialogue that we are having, and there Bill talks about, and in the forward to my book, the link to which I will send it to you, he does talk about the political possibility of meditative inquiry.
oh,
His work
interesting,
is on autobiography, the
yeah,
significance of understanding oneself in relation to the social structures, right? And a lot of people also thought, oh, autobiography is not political, it is not radical, but it is. When you are learning about you, about your life, which is not disconnected to the structures around you, it is a political act.
yeah,
It is a radical critical act.
Yeah. It's interesting as you're talking there. I've been talking with some other folks in the department, and we're actually looking at making a co-edited book around like sort of decolonization of self. And like, so it's interesting. When I went to my supervisor and I was using that word decolonization, he said, "Well, isn't there like a more positive word you could use?" So I was having a conversation with someone else, and she brought up this term regenerative. And I was almost thinking of this regenerative self. So, like we regenerating who we are as individuals as a consequence of this process. And, I was reading a book that was talking about metabolizing things. Like he says, like a machine takes in things like, the banking model of education. And I think you referred to it. Like we take it in and we push it out. And that's just that's a mechanistic, like a process. Like we take in something and we put out the exact same thing, the banking model. Whereas if you metabolize something, like, and that's the difference between a machine and a living being, is when you metabolize something, you take it in and it becomes part of who you are. And so that's that metabolism, and you put out something that may be different. So when we do
Mhm.
metabolize things, and I think part of that process is kind of that word, kind of, or those words, I think, kind of link nicely with this, like the regenerative self, and sort of metabolizing, where we bring in things and they become a part of us. And I think, like, I really like the connection of those two terms. Do you feel as those would be applicable in this kind of context?
Absolutely. It is regeneration, right? It is
Mm.
regeneration not according to a pre-decided
Uh,
method or concoction, right? But it's a regeneration which is an organic, mysterious, if I may use, a process rather than something predetermined and pre-established, right? That's why I don't like outcomes, because
yeah,
outcomes make everything pre-established. But the education is a generative and regenerative,
yeah,
emergent and remergent process, right? Rather than something fixed.
yeah. No, I like that. Oh, that's great. Um, I'm just looking through my. Here's one of the things. Listening with your whole being. Like I know that's sort of going way off topic from where we were, but like I've just got it here, and I want to have a more of an understanding of listening as with your whole being. I know it sort of stems away from some of this stuff, but maybe it's connected in ways that I don't see.
No, definitely, it's again, listening is central to a meditative way of living, central to the process of meditative inquiry. So I think what happens is, through, as I said, through the webs of the web of thought, the web of discourses, the web of social structures, our brain becomes narrow. It begins to think and feel and listen in ways that are prescribed or that are acceptable. And listening is a process through which we receive the world, right? We learn from the world. It's one of the ways through which we connect with the world, right? So many things have come into existence, like music. The whole generation of music is rooted in listening. When we listen to our environment, that listening, uh, created the possibilities in us to create something beautiful. But listening something that is listening in a way that is not conditioned by the context in which you are, the forces that have been impressed on your brain to made it to think and listen and understand in certain ways. So listening with your whole being implies not listening just with your mind, which is conditioned, because it translates everything into its own vocabulary
Mm,
or into its own conception. So listening with your whole being is the capacity to be meditatively aware in the presence of people and nature, so that you are not only listening what you want to listen, or what uh, you can quickly translate into your own mental structures, but that you have the capacity to listen to something with a fresh mind, with a sense of openness. And then that happens, then that listening has a very different effect than the listening that is happening from a completely conditioned perspective. There are a lot of people who will say, no, it is impossible for somebody to listen without all the prejudices that one has, all the conditioned thought patterns one has. I think these people have not tried it and experimented with it. We have the capacity to be deeply aware in the moment and be free of these conditioned and conditioned patterns. It is possible. Otherwise, we would never think of anything new. There wouldn't be any explorations or eureka moments if our brain was completely limited by what it has known from the pressures of the society. We have the capacity to be attentive, to be free, and to invite something new. So, listening, basically, listening with your whole being is not just listening with the conditioned thought patterns, the rigid structures that society have placed upon you, but creating the capacity for an open being which can receive more, much more than it's possible through a small hole, a cage.
That see that conversation that you're having there really resonates with that idea when we started talking about like ocean literacy and this
Absolutely.
awe and wonder, like because the ocean literacy is this conditioned approach, like you're saying, like you're looking at it through these conditioned ideals of one way of looking at things. But awe and wonder opens up your whole being to seeing and responding to the ocean in a way that isn't so conditioned. Like that's when you're talking like that, I can see that application in that space for me. So, and even when I was talking about sort of like just having an intuitive response to words, like you maybe you're receiving them in a way that isn't just cognitive.
Absolutely. And I think I'm really glad that you brought back that point because I did want to have a discussion on that point. See, when we are talking about climate crisis, um, sustainability, and all that, we are talking from a very cognitive, scientific perspective,
Mm,
right?
yeah,
And a lot of people think that the solution to climate crisis and and all the problems, global warming and all that is encompassed in it, is going to happen through science.
yeah,
And I don't think it can,
yeah,
only because of the science, because science is rooted in the capitalist greedy structures.
yeah,
Science is not independent of the capitalism, of racism. It's not free from them, because who are scientists? Scientists are people who
yeah,
are impacted, influenced by the structures that they are living in. So uh, definitely science can play an important role, but the most important role has to be played by each one of us, where we have a relationship with the nature of awe and wonder and reverence. As you said, a meditative relationship where we don't see nature as something different from us.
mm,
Like I there was a wonderful post on the Facebook. I'll try to dig it up. It was saying that we are created from the elements of the society. And Lord, all the cultures and the religions of the world have believed that, right? We have been created in and through nature,
yeah,
and to which we return.
yeah,
So there is not we and nature, we are nature. So
yeah,
because we don't respect our own bodies, we don't respect our own creative capacities, we don't respect the life in us and around us, of course we don't respect nature. We pollute the oceans. You go on the oceans, right? I have heard of Pacific Gyre, like there is a
yeah.
such a
That's
big
it.
island of plastic, right?
Yeah,
The ruthlessly we cut the trees. We just don't care about nature, which means not that we are so much bigger and better than nature, because we have stopped caring about ourselves.
Yeah.
and our relationship. So we are inflicting violence on everything. So
Yes.
unless this tendency to be violent to oneself, to one's relationship ends, you're not going to respect and have reverence for nature. You
Yeah.
are not going to protect nature really in a very deep way, in a very interconnected way. And when you feel that cutting a tree is like cutting your baby or cutting yourself, you'll be very careful. Do I really need to cut it? Do I really need it? Like I've heard that in um, in Brazil and other South American countries, they are just destroying Amazon rainforests to raise more cattle
Yeah.
for the meat industry. Like from every standard, it's clear that eating too much meat or eating meat every day is not helping anybody. It's
Yeah.
not helping you, it's not helping the animals, and it's not helping the nature. But we're still on that path. So but the solution to that is not changing the government, which is not going to cut the rainforest. That could be one partial solution, but the real solution is, are we going to discover ourselves in a way so that we are not violent to ourselves and to the
Hmm.
people around you? Then only perhaps you will stop violence against people. But if you're stressed, if you are tortured, if you're a tortured soul, right? If you are conflicted within your being, you have no sense of peace. You really don't care about the peace on earth or
Hmm.
peace in nature. You
Yeah.
really don't.
Yes, I've often like I talk to my students like because I think sometimes when I'm teaching my classes I feel like I talk a lot about hegemonic systems and processes and I think okay well I've got to leave my students with a little bit of hope, so I talk about axiology and like that's our oh, are we back? Um,
Yes, your
those,
internet was unstable for a bit. Yeah.
so those choices help to manifest the world. So it's nice that like I've been sort of talking about that, but I haven't really understood what I'm talking about in my class as being linked to this meditative inquiry. So it's really good for me to see that what I'm talking about is linked in a way to this process of meditative inquiry and being able to enact the values that you want. um, this conversation comes back to a word that I have on my sheet here, existential. And so I think I see those links now between it's a matter of our own existence that we engage in these processes.
Sorry, I didn't get the last point.
Oh, sorry. It's like
Share of your
like
question.
yeah, the existential element. So when we think about existentialism, like the engaging in these processes is really about our own existence, like and whether it's the perpetuation of our own existence or our existence as beings in this space.
Absolutely, I think that's what we just talked about, right?
Yeah.
That the existential, the true, the existing, not only just the conditioned,
Yeah.
but the tree that you say it's a tree is not just the tree in your knowledge. Tree
Mm,
actually exists,
yeah.
right? And when you talk about fear within yourself, it's not the fear that you can describe and intellectually analyze, but fear that's actually existing.
Mm,
So basically, what I'm trying to say, that we look at everything, the outer and the inner, through the constructed reality of the mind and the thought,
mm,
which is conditioned, which is shaped by so many forces. But there is also an existential level of our being, of the nature, that we don't tap into.
Mm.
for being overly, uh, I don't want to say influenced by, but overly
Conditioned, maybe.
indulging,
Yeah.
indulging in the cognitive mental processes.
Yeah. Hmm. Now, like, and you spoke with Adrian Downey. Like, when you think, like, I've heard of people talk about, like indigenous knowledge being knowledge of the place. So, where you see in many indigenous cultures in North America, and I'm not sure about elsewhere, but people have this idea that you can't really separate the individual from the land, and that's one of the conversations that you had. So, there seems to be a sort of coalescing, I guess, of indigenous knowledge ways in what I see as North America and some of this meditative approach. Do you want to speak to that intersection at all?
Absolutely. So the edited collection that I'm going to share with you,
Yeah.
in that there is a chapter by one of my doctoral students, Diane Obed, who is an Inuit, and she explored the connections between meditative inquiry and indigenous philosophy. So
Okay.
I basically think that the ancient cultures were quite connected to the nature. They
Mm,
did not see nature as an enemy that they need to control or need to tame to do what they want to do. They always worked along with nature. So you see, the older societies, their relationship with nature was not one of antagonism. It's always working together. Even when I was growing up, every house in my locality used to have a tree inside the house.
hmm,
But if you go now, it's a Delhi. So even Delhi 30, 40 years ago was very different from Delhi now. Now everything is built. If you see the houses that are being built in Halifax now, they don't care about trees. They don't
no.
care about nature. They are making them as much built up area as possible. They're focusing on that. So the ancient cultures, the older cultures, didn't have an antagonistic relationship with the nature. So they lived in harmony with the nature, right? That's why they established themselves along the rivers. They knew that the rivers, their sustenance is dependent on the river. So they would pray to the river. Or
Mm,
they looked at the concept of reverence that we were talking about, right? They would look nature and natural elements as their coexisting partners,
mm,
and never thinking themselves as superior. But when they are praying the sun or praying the river or praying the mountains, they are definitely seeing them as someone who depends on these elements,
mm,
depends on these resources, right? So the reverence emerges on its own. But with the advent of science and being able to control nature in certain ways, we begin to think that we don't need to have reverence for nature. Maybe we can have a lot of trees around it and manicured grass because that looks pretty, or we can go for a walk in the nature. But that idea of reverence is lost. That is
mm,
core to indigenous people. And meditative inquiry is nothing. It's indigenous philosophy that emerged from countries like from the Eastern world,
mm,
where a lot of emphasis was placed on learning about yourself, understanding yourself, and your connection with nature and your connection with the universe, right? So I think they are deeply connected, very
yeah.
deeply connected. And we need to, as we were having the discussion again, right? Unless we move from uh, the perspective of acquiring knowledge about nature and controlling it, whether to destroy it or to protect it, whether we move from this anthropocentric perception to having reverence for nature as something, seeing us as something which has emerged from the nature
Yeah.
and is entirely dependent on nature. The resolution of nature and nature related problems seems very distant to me.
Now, like, for me to like, and I think we're going to be running out of time here soon. But like, I my own experience. Like when I spoke about my daughter seeing that sort that I can, help that moment for her move towards reverence. Is there, because like as an educator, like let's say I get people into these spaces where they can engage with um, these mystical moments, let's call them. And is there a way that I can facilitate their growth once they experience those moments? Because I know you've got here, you know I think it's again from page 9. You spoke about them just sitting in nature and beginning to see the beauty of seeing and listening. I'd like to know a little bit more about that. Like, how can we help them or facilitate growth towards this listening with your whole being and the meditative inquiry in that particular space in nature, like that like a
I think that's again a wonderful question, and I think your voice cut out. So I'll just reiterate what I thought you were saying. You wanted to look at again the example of your daughters, who was when she was looking at the fish, and she was like she was shaking with joy,
yeah.
in awe and wonder, right? And how can that awe and wonder turn into reverence,
Yeah, yeah, and
right?
and so
I,
yeah, and like, how do you help those students, or how do I help my daughter, manifest this idea of listening with the whole, like maybe she was listening with her whole body, but you know, I don't want her to lose that, because I think the education system teaches that out of us. Like
yes.
it teaches us not to have that anymore. And I
Yeah.
don't want that to happen to my child. So
Yeah.
how do I protect my daughter?
And protecting everybody, right?
Yeah,
I think
everybody else. Yeah.
I think when a relationship is broken, the only way to bring it to, or one of the ways to bring it back to where it can be, is to by initiating the conversation, right? And in this context, that conversation is being in nature, that you do, right? Because nature, we are from the nature, right? And as soon as we are outside in the elements, what I have noticed, that nature begins to cleanse your stresses, your fears. It starts to heal you. The healing process begins as soon as you are in nature. And uh, the the majesty, the magic, the beauty is everywhere, from the smallest dust particle to the galaxies, and the sun and the moon, everywhere, right? It's everywhere. So when we look at it, the awe and wonder is very natural, which is there in all kids. The
Mm.
curiosity, the desire to touch everything, desire to explore everything, desire to, like, I have a very little baby right now, right? 14 months, putting everything in her mouth. That intrinsic uh, curiosity and awe and wonder is already there,
Yeah.
right? And when we let that happen continually, for which the parents have to make an effort, right? So I would take her to a tree or to a plant and just stand still,
Mm.
rather than saying, hey, this is the leaf, this is the flower, this is this flower, this is this flower. Can you just sense the tree?
Yeah.
Can you just sense the grass? They have their own energies, they have their own being. And through that contact, through that regular contact, right, through that frequent contact, the awe and wonder and curiosity will grow more and more. And
Mm.
when they see people around them, like your daughter will see you having a reverence for nature. This is wonderful. The tree, I thank you because I depend on you. You
Mm.
give me everything, right? The
Yeah.
nature, the beauty of the nature, I'm so I have so much respect and reverence for everything around me. If we talk to children about them, If we share it with them, not necessarily saying how I make you reverent, but sharing
Mm.
my reverence,
I
sharing
like that. Yeah,
my
yeah,
connection, right? And
yeah.
then they begin to see, and it's obvious that they imbibe that they
Yeah.
begin to see the example of the assignment that I mentioned to you, right? Students were so shocked that they never looked at anything. They never looked
Mm,
at the tree, they never looked at the bird, what the woodpecker does, or at least they didn't do it for a very long time. So for
mm,
them, it was so refreshing. Just an open assignment every week, try to go as many times to nature as possible and just listen and observe what you see. That's
mm.
it. Some
Yeah.
of them fix out too because, okay, what's your angle here? How am I going to get the A? Like,
Yes.
what are you talking about? And I said, there is no angle. I just want you to take time for yourself and connect with nature. That's important part of being a human being, being an educator, and above all, being a social studies educator.
Mm,
You need to know your environment in
yeah.
a very deeper way. And I would say majority of them just love that possibility that they
Mm.
can just do that through their term and they don't have to take out any extra time for that. It's part of their studies.
Yeah, that's great. I really like that idea of like sharing my own reverence as if it's contagious, because I think that goes back to some of the conversation that we had before, where you're not telling people how they should do. Like you're not saying this is what you need to do in your life, because I can control what I have in my life, and you get to have the power to decide what's going to happen in your life, and maybe you choose to adopt reverence or maybe not. And I think that goes back to sort of that empowerment element of meditative inquiry, where you have the power over yourself and what you find authentic and meaningful. And I think claiming that power is part of that political process that we spoke about. So I think that's interesting. um, that sort of covers a lot of what I had on my sheet here. So, and it's we have been going for an hour and 20 minutes. So it's a lot of cognitive load going on there. How do you feel about the conversation there?
I think I feel great, and I just thank you again because I really enjoy the opportunity to speak with people, to listen to their ideas, and to be able to share my own ideas when the conversation is authentic, when somebody really wanted to have that conversation, right? And in this case, it was clear you really wanted to explore some of the things that you thought were interesting to you, and you raised so many points that I found very interesting, and I wanted to engage with them. So probably we can conclude the dialogue. So I really want to thank you for that. But before we conclude it, I just want to ask you one question.
Yeah.
So, what has been, some of the insights from this dialogue for you that have emerged from you that you think your students or anybody who is reading it, who will read this paper eventually or watch this conversation, will get from?
You know what? Like it's funny, and I think it happened right at the end there. Like there's when you talk about that epiphany, and I was wanting to control the destiny of my daughter, right? And I think well, there's two pieces in there, because the well-being of my daughter, and then you were very quick to add, and everybody else, because it's my daughter's well-being, but the way that she engages in the world, as we spoke about in this conversation, influences all the people that she engages with. So yes, it's preserve, like it's maintaining that sense of awe and wonder, but that's beneficial to everybody that she encounters. And I think that that's a really important point, is that this exploration of self is, it's looking after my relationships with the planet and the other people and myself, but it also helps all the other people around me. And I think you mentioned that in your article before. So just seeing the reiteration of that, and my daughter having power, like I was about, how do I protect that in my daughter? Well, she has power of her own. And I think that there's a big lesson for me as a teacher. you know, instead of me wanting to, or as a teacher, as a parent, as a human being, is, you know, that idea of control is it's an illusion. You know, like people want to have this power for themselves, and they get to determine how they're going to manifest in the world. And so that was a key point. And you know, then linking it to, you know, I can control who I am and my reverence, and people can see that, and they can choose to take that on for themselves, or you know, my reverence will impact other people's ways of being, and their interactions with me will be impacted by my reverence. So, you know, again, going back to, it's not political propaganda, it's my way of being that can influence the interactions that I have with other people, other beings, and that becomes what's valuable. So for me, that's what I want people to take. That's what I took, and maybe people can learn from the lessons that I've had from this conversation.
Wonderful. Yeah, I think absolutely one of the tendencies that we as human beings have is to not only control our way of being, but controlling other ways of being
Hmm.
out of the fear because we don't know the deeper dynamics of the life, right? So I think it is so important to transform yourselves, taking a deep interest in that, and engaging through that with people and see if it has any impact on the people, right? Rather than controlling
Yeah.
their way of being, their way of living.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and so I'm also really grateful for your time. So we'll like, once I get the transcript with this, I'll try and save it in a Word document, and I can share it with you. I can go through and do some initial